So a very warm namaste to all of you and a very good day to the participants of other time zones. Uh, we are here once again for this study session, the International Study Camp of the book, The Way of the Disciple. And this study is being directed jointly by Sister Linda Oliveira and Sir Pedro Oliveira. Let us begin today's session with the universal invocation. O hidden life, vibrant in every atom, O hidden light, shining in every creature, O hidden love, embracing all in oneness, may each who feels himself as one with thee know he is also one with every other. Thank you. It is my privilege to introduce Brother Pedro Oliveira, who will be directing today's session. Brother Pedro, he has been a member of the Theosophical Society since 1978. He has held a number of important positions, including that of the International Secretary of the Theosophical Society, President of the Society's Indo-Pacific Federation. He was the officer in charge of the editorial office, which is at Adyar, the international headquarters. He was the education coordinator of the Australian section and the president of his parent lodge in Brazil. Brother Pedro is the author of several books and many articles, his most recent book being on Annie Besant in India, which is co-authored by Brother Agarwal. And he has also lectured extensively in the Theosophical Society internationally. So we are very fortunate to have Brother Pedro with us today, who will be conducting this session. Welcome, sir. I request you to begin the session now.
Thank you. A very warm welcome to all of you, and my gratitude to Brother Pradip Mahapatra and to all the organizers of this online study class. As it was mentioned just now, this study class is based on Miss Clara Codd's book, The Way of the Disciple. So perhaps it would be relevant to spend a few minutes on the meaning of the word disciple. And I have searched this meaning etymologically at its source. And a disciple, besides other meanings like disciples of Christ or disciples of Buddha and so on, essentially a disciple is a learner. So a disciple, or even a candidate for a discipleship, needs to be a learner. Not so much in terms of external knowledge, but learning about himself or herself. And if we embark in this journey of self-knowledge or self-learning, we will realize that there are a number of aspects in our nature that not normally come to the fore, but they need to be learned about, otherwise we cannot really do the work that is expected from us from a theosophical point of view. Perhaps, and I emphasize the word perhaps, the Mahatmas knew this in a very deep sense, and therefore before they admitted someone as a chela or a disciple, they put that person on probation. And if you read the passages on probation in the Mahatma letters, they are very illuminating. Of course, the British members at that time A.O. Hume and A.P. Sinnett, they took umbrage to this process of probation because they considered it as an invasion of privacy. But the Mahatmas tried to explain to them that that is important because they need to know of what a person is capable of. And the process of probation will reveal that. It is a process of tests, challenges. It is a process in which one's nature comes to the fore, whether one likes it or not. And nobody can predict what the result will be. In October 1886, in an article that Madame Blavatsky wrote for the magazine The Path, which was edited by Mr. William Kwan Judge, she said, out of 72 accepted members as chelas by the masters since the foundation of the society in 1875, only 3 did not fail, and only 1 fully succeeded. So this, I would like to refer to this as HPB statistics about the path. And it shows that it's not a process to be taken lightly. It also should not be considered that this is a process to humiliate people or to trick people. The principle involved is very simple. In order for the Mahatmas to place their trust on someone to conduct their work in the world, they need to know if that person is truly capable. And eventually, as you can see, the majority at that time wasn't. Anyhow, this is just an initial comment. Let me see if I can share the PowerPoint slides with you. Can you see it?
Yes, sir, they are visible.
Very good. So these are some salient points from one chapter of the book by Miss Codd called Some Laws of the Occult Brotherhood. The word laws is important, and if I remember correctly from my days at Adyar, there is a Sanskrit word that conveys this meaning on a much broader scale, and that is the word Ritta, which I was told is cosmic order, or that order that supports the entire cosmos. The entire cosmos depends on this order. And therefore, the Brotherhood of Adepts, they follow very ancient laws, and they are quite inflexible on that. So let us see if I can show you the first slide. Yes. Let us take a few moments to read it. So you can see from the point of view of the Mahatmas, their understanding of law is very specific. It is not something that depends on a parliament or a court of law or an institution. It is inherent in life. It is inherent in the fabric of the cosmos. And that's how they proceed with their work. There is a very interesting sentence in the middle of this quote. The cosmic will finds its agents and embodiments in the perfected man. So that's what they are. They are embodiments of the law. They are not only embodiments of love and compassion and wisdom, but also embodiments of the law. And Master M said, law is law with us, and no power can make us abate one jot or title of our duty. So from the point of view of law, for the Mahatmas, it's non-negotiable. They follow that which they are in their core. The second slide. For this reason, they never interfere. This is Miss Cord speaking, Clara Cord. For this reason, they never interfere with the workings of the great law, either with themselves or other individuals or nations. Teach to eschew the causes ripple of effect. Thou shalt let run its course, says the voice of the silence. It is now clear why the great brotherhood could not, as I am often asked, have prevented the world wars. If human ignorance and its consequences, fear, selfishness, greed, produce such a ghastly result, the brotherhood could not have prevented it or deflected in any way. Because that would mean to interfere with the law of karma. The suffering generated by the two wars and by the ongoing wars is made, it's human made. It's tragic, very painful, very difficult to bear, but it is a fact that it is made by humans, mostly by those who turn their eyes away from compassion and love. Another slide. Neither can an adept do it for his cella. The Master M writes, concerning some great trouble which was afflicting HPB, she suffers acutely and I am unable to help her, for all this is effect from causes which cannot be undone. Occultism in Theosophy. What the Master can do, if the disciple is utterly and wholeheartedly dedicated, is to rearrange the sequence of certain karmic events, but he can never abrogate them. There were moments in Madame Blavatsky's life when she was at death's door, in which the masters interfered and prolonged her life, so to speak, always giving her a choice to pass away if she wanted, or to continue and finish her task, particularly the writing of the secret doctrine. But she was also very much aware that most of her suffering had to do with her own personal karma. Working with the law, the adepts very wisely do not hasten events. The Master M writes, the world was not made in a day. Let evolution take its course naturally, lest we make it deviate and produce monsters by presuming to guide it. This comes from the Mahatma letters. Even in the development of his chelas, the Master does not use extra pressure. The Deva sight and Deva hearing are not obtained in one short birth, This is a quotation from The Voice of the Silence. So this is important. The masters have a view of spiritual development that is completely opposite from certain instructors or gurus today who maintain that an individual can do anything, can live any lifestyle, and still press ahead on the path of enlightenment. They don't take that view. They um, um, they they fully understand that the process of spiritual evolution uh, it takes its time. Um, um, uh, it takes its time, and the individual cannot be pressured into take steps on the path. He or she has to be fully ready. Proceeding. Sorry, someone is trying to call me. Yes. I'm sorry, I am at a meeting at the moment. I will call you back. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to continue with the presentation of slides, but, oh, here it is. In spite of the fact that they are able to discern future events, they are debarred from using any abnormal powers that might interfere with the nation's karma. We can examine this through the questions and answers later on. Nor are they allowed to use those abnormal powers until ordinary means have been tried and failed. If you read the Mahatma letters again and again, the masters say that I cannot do this. I have to get permission to use this kind of energy to generate this kind of effect. Almost as if communicating to Mr. Sinnett that that power is not personal. That power belongs to the unity of life. And therefore, he needs to consult his superiors about that. Let us take a minute, a few moments to read this. So there are some important ideas here in this passage. The adepts never ever subject to themselves the will of another, and they say that this is the mode of proceeding, the favorite mode of proceeding of the brothers of the shadow, or those who tread the left-hand path. They never do this because they see every individual as essentially a monad in its evolutionary journey. And this monad has to reap its own lessons, absorb its own understanding. It may receive help from them, but the main work has to be done by itself. And then she quotes a letter that Brother Leadbeater received, in which the master is very clear: if I were to demand that you should do one thing or the other, instead of simply advising, I would be responsible for every effect that might flow from the step, and you would acquire a secondary merit. And this is confirmed very clearly in the third fundamental proposition of the secret doctrine, which says that human evolution proceeds from self-devised and self-induced efforts. This is a cardinal truth of evolution according to the esoteric philosophy. The individual soul needs to find in itself that understanding that can help it to take the next step in evolution. It has to come from within itself, and not necessarily by surrendering its will to another person or persons. And Clara Cod has a certain warning for those who interfere in other people's lives. There are those who, I once said in a talk, they have become specialists on others. They know what others should dress, should eat, should speak, should behave, which companies they should have, instead of looking at themselves. So they became extremely judgmental. And judgmentalism is a form of eroding the principle of universal brotherhood without distinction. We proceed. Miss Cod said, even in the case of the initiated or non-initiated chelas or disciples, the master refrains from making decisions for them, or even from giving them too much counsel. And then follows the quote from the Mahatma letters. To the last and supreme initiation, the chela is left to his own device and counsel. We have to fight our own battles, and the adage, the adept becomes, he is not made, is true to the letter. Since every one of us is the creator and producer of the causes that lead us to such or some other results, we have to reap but what we had sown. Our chelas are helped but when they are innocent of the causes that led them into trouble. When such causes are generated by foreign outside influences, life and struggle for adeptship would be too easy had we all scavengers behind us to sweep away the effects we have generated through our own rashness and presumption. Again, several important ideas. A chela is left to his own device, even until the last and supreme initiation. And of course, the Mahatma would offer some guidance, but the Mahatmas could not interfere in the decision-making process of a disciple. That is up to that person. And then there is this is a very much quoted passage. The adept becomes, he is not made. Which means the impulse to become an adept comes from within, not only from within the mind, but from within the higher principles, including Buddhi and Atma. We'll continue. The master did not even tell HPB and the colonel exactly what to do. He writes, the founders prayed to no deity in the beginning of the Theosophical Society, nor asked his help since. Did we help the founders? No. They were helped by their own inspiration of self-reliance and sustained by their reverence for the rights of man. And again he writes, we advise and never order, but we do influence individuals. And speaking of HPB, the master writes, in accordance with our rules, M was not permitted to forbid her such a course in so many words. There is another passage in the Mahatma letters that says that there was no unanimity in the Brotherhood of Adepts to form the TS. Some of them were not convinced that humanity was ready for it. But Masters M and KH took the responsibility, and they were allowed to proceed with the experiment. But they were told by their superiors that the experiment should be conducted without their personal management. In other words, the society was born, was founded without a spiritual authority. The society encourages its members to tread the spiritual path or to pursue the spiritual path, but the society did not make a creed about the masters, and they didn't want that. But on another point of view, it is their society, because the idea, the impetus, the impulse to found it came from them. The brothers never give messages through spiritualistic mediums. Even in the early days of the society, clairvoyants and mediums were giving messages purporting to come from the adepts and claiming to have seen and contacted them. The Master DK, Joel Kuhl, writing on behalf of the Master KH, warns that such happenings would lead many theosophists into error. He issued the following statement. Henceforth, any medium or seer who will feel disposed to claim either to have been visited by, or to have held conversation with, or to have seen my master, will have to substantiate the claim by prefixing his or her statement with 3 secret words, which he, my teacher, would divulge to and leave in the safekeeping of Mr. A.O. Hume and Mr. A.P. Sinnett. To his regret, my master is forced to adopt this step, as unfortunately, of late, such self-deceptions have become quite frequent and would demand a speedy check. And this process continues. We had here in Australia someone who claimed to be a reincarnation of Madame Blavatsky. Then she upgraded that claim to say that she was the mouthpiece of Lord Maitreya. And many people believed her. And this has happening in many places around the world. And it's easy for people to believe this. Clara Cord continues, the astral plane is what Madame HPB calls the world of the great illusion, and says that no blossom plucked in those regions has ever yet being brought down to earth without its serpent coil round the stem. Here she is commenting upon the words of the voice of the silence, which calls the astral plane the hall of learning, and says, in it the soul will find the blossoms of life, but under every flower a serpent coiled. It is only by attaining the insight of the higher spiritual planes that this phenomena can be rightly understood and evaluated. Then she adds, CWL, that means C.W. Leadbeater, always warned us to be wary of any vision or voice which flattered us. And this is very common in psychic communications. And it's very common in people who claim a knowledge of past lives. There is quite a number of people who claim to have been Cleopatra in the past life, or any other important person, which indicates that there is some degree of flattering in this communication. And this is a challenge for all of us. Regarding the serpent coil, it means that is the characteristic of the psychic plane or the astral plane. The experiences, the nuances, the images may become too alluring, and they convince people that they are real. But this quote indicates that that's not true. In other passage in the voice of the silence, it is said, flee the hall of learning. You will not find your guru in those regions. The hall of learning is just a stage of self-knowledge and self-testing. She said, I have come across so many messages claiming to be from the masters, so many authoritative teachings from all sorts of directions, but it's extremely rare for an adept to do this kind of thing. He does not even like being quoted. May he forgive me for that. As he once wrote to Mr. Sinnett, you may use the arguments, but not my authority or name. The last thing that a master of the wisdom or his pupils desire is to be made into an infallible oracle. There is another important passage to be mentioned. In the last letter received from the masters, which was in August 1900, and the recipient was Annie Besant, one of them said, how few are those who can know anything about us? We work anonymously, silently, and the constant reference to our names creates a confused aura that hinders our work. So it is for each one of us to discover if there have been excesses in this area in the past, and if we have perhaps contributed to that to some extent. But the masters work anonymously, and the repetition of their names doesn't help. Now we move to another chapter. Do we have time for another chapter?
Yes, I think it's only 5 minutes past 11, so we do have enough time.
Very good. Sister Saxena, what time do we end the presentation?
So we have another 30 minutes. to go through it, and then we will keep 10 minutes for question answers.
Thank you. We can take some moments to read this quote. This is a quote from The Voice of the Silence, literal quote, that talks about the two paths, the open path and the secret path. The open path leads to the changeless change, nirvana, the glorious state of absoluteness, the bliss past human thought, and it's the path of liberation. And the second path leads the arhan or arhat to mental woe unspeakable, woe for the living dead. Miss Card explains that those who are ignorant of the esoteric truths are living dead, and helpless pity for the man of karmic sorrow. The fruit of karma, sages dare not still. And then she will quote some very important passages from T. Subbarao, who was an eminent theosophist in South India, and who was very respected by Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott. And these two paths are historically established in many traditions. One is the path that leads the individual to complete liberation, and therefore it severs his or her connection with humanity. And the other path is the path of embracing the suffering of humanity, which is one of the greatest challenges. But it is this path that the great masters of the wisdom have chosen to tread. The Voice of the Silence says, the open way is oblivion of the world and man forever. The secret way leads also to paranirvanic bliss, but at the close of kalpas or ages without number. Nirvanas gained and lost, refused, from boundless pity and compassion for the world of deluded mortals. Behold, the goal of bliss and the long path of woe are at the furthest end. Thou canst choose either, or, O aspirant to sorrow, throughout the coming cycles. His Holiness the Dalai Lama declared in his website that every morning he recites the Bodhisattva vow. And the essence of the Bodhisattva vow is that I will not be liberated, I will not be enlightened, I will not attain nirvana until there is suffering on earth. Something very similar was written by Annie Besant, that she would never enter liberation until the last human being had been saved from ignorance. It must be something difficult to understand. How can someone embrace this proximity of suffering so completely without any form of reaction. So obviously, this is something that needs to be meditated much more and understood. We can take a few moments to read Subbarao's statement. Yes. This is extracted from an article which is published in the book Esoteric Writings of T. Subbarao. The article is called Occultism in Southern India. And he mentions the two paths again, you know. And the first path, he says, is a natural path of progress through moral effort and practice of virtues. A natural, coherent, and safe growth of the soul is the result. A position of firm equilibrium is reached and maintained, which cannot be overthrown or shaken by any unexpected assault. It is the normal method followed by the vast mass of humanity, and it doesn't require the constant watchfulness of a guru. Many religions seem to inculcate the same teaching. In some Christian monastic books, this is also mentioned, not so much as a finality or an end in itself, but as a preparation for something much more profound. In those books, in the Christian mystical tradition, the real aim is to completely die to oneself so that Christ himself guides one's life in the form of service and sacrifice. Let us see the second quote from Subbarao. The other road is the precipitous path of occultism through a series of initiations. Occult progress, growth along this path, is effected by the adept directing through the cella various forces, which enable him to obtain prematurely, so to speak, a knowledge of his spiritual nature, and to obtain powers to which he is not morally entitled by degree of his progress. So there is a change in the air here, because the individual has to go through certain stages of awakening, and in which certain energies are directed towards him or her, and the individual may not be fully prepared, and therefore this is the result. Under the circumstances, writes Subbarao, again, it may happen that the cella loses his moral balance and falls into the dukpa path, that is the dark side, the left-hand path. The path is always spoken of as being as narrow as the edge of a razor, the difference between the white and the black magician being mainly one of unselfish and selfish motive. So we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation about a disciple, someone who is a learner, but has to learn about himself as well. And Madame Blavatsky's statistics that many people who tried to become a disciple in the early days of the TS, they didn't succeed. Some of them left the society bitterly and accused the founders and so on. But all depends on oneself. And one feels tempted to say that if the right foundation is laid for the spiritual path, and the right foundation is altruism, which is a word that comes from the Latin word alter, which means other. If the foundation of altruism is laid, which means one does not seek anything for oneself, one does not seek recognition, one does not seek power, one does not seek influencing others. If this foundation is laid, chances are that the progress will be smooth, even when there are challenges. Then Subbarao concludes, this path is eminently dangerous to those who do not hold the talisman which ensures safety. This talisman is a perfectly unselfish, self-forgetting, self-annihilating devotion to the religious good of mankind, a self-abnegation which is not temporal, but must have no end forever, and the object of which is the religious enlightenment of human race. Of course, the personal mind may ask the question, is this possible? Can someone live completely immersed in altruism, in unselfishness? The answer is for every one of us to make, but this is the teaching. Because this kind of self-abnegation and unselfishness, it shields the individual from many dangers. I remember at ADR, Radhaji was talking to us and she was saying, if the self within you has flared up, unless you are very aware and attentive, it may flare up again. How does the self flare up? Anger, suspicion, judgment, intransigence, irritability, pride. These are the qualities of the self. But if the foundation of selflessness is made, then one can proceed. She quotes now from Light on the Path, a very profound theosophical treatise. This is the secret path, the path of renunciation, the path of woe, so called because the awakened spiritual perception of the disciple shows him the spiritual darkness in which most men live. Light on the Path speaks of the helplessness of those who have seen no light, whose souls are in profound gloom. And it reminds the neophyte that the sin and shame of the world are your sin and shame, for you are a part of it. Your karma is inexorably interwoven with the great karma. Mr. Krishnamurti said exactly the same thing. You are the world, and the world is you. His Holiness the Dalai Lama said the same thing. We need to live a life in which there is universal responsibility. Blaming someone else doesn't help. Taking responsibility helps. But more importantly, a life lived that tries to lift a little the helplessness of those who have seen no light, whose souls are in profound gloom. This is what the great teachers try to do, the great masters try to do. Along this path of renunciation, there are three main steps. First of all, to live to benefit mankind without that motive, pure and undefiled, without even a subconscious trace of desire for self-benefit of any kind, inner or outer. This path cannot be trodden. It is in a wonderful letter to Mr. Judge, the Master KH tells him, you must live for other men and with them, not for or with yourself. That's to say again, a perfectly unselfish, self-forgetting, self-annihilating devotion to the good of man without any distinction of race, creed, color, or sex. There is a passage in the Mahatma letter that says, none of us lives for ourselves. We all live for the world. This is not poetry. This is not a figure of speech. This is a way of life. Then there is this passage from Practical Occultism. True occultism is the great renunciation of self, unconditionally and absolutely, in thought as in action, not for himself, but for the world he lives. No sooner is a cella accepted than his personality must disappear, and he has to become a mere beneficent force in nature. It is impossible to employ spiritual force if there is the slightest tinge of selfishness remaining in the operator. The powers and forces of spirit lend themselves only to the pure in heart, and this is divine magic. The question of the personality is there. Again, some people may consider it hard, but this is the teaching. If the personality occupies the foreground, that means me, I, mine, self-interest, moods, and so on, then spiritual progress is delayed. But if the personality understands itself and finds itself as an instrument, then things may proceed. Brother G gave a very inspiring address at RTR, explaining the meaning of the expression in the Gospels, not thy will, not my will, but thy will be done. It was very enlightening, and it was along those lines. And then one has to consider, what does it mean to become a mere beneficent force in nature? A life full of beneficence, helping others. Not necessarily directly by one's influence. That's the story of the Buddha, for example. There were criminals who wanted to do him harm, but when they enter in the spiritual field of his beneficence, they become fully aware that their way of life was wrong, and they became a disciple of the Buddha. He was asleep according to the tradition. Then she says, he who would profit by the wisdom of the universal mind has to reach it through the whole of humanity without distinction of race, complexion, religion, and social status. It is altruism, not egoism, even in its most legal and noble conception, that can lead the unity to merge its little self in the universal selves. It is to these needs And to this work that the true disciple of true occultism has to devote himself if he would obtain divine knowledge. The same emphasis on altruism, the same emphasis on regard the whole of humanity in one's life. And then this is the last slide. It is about the difference between manas and buddhi, between mind and spiritual intuition, from the Mahatma letters. Nothing draws to any outsider save his evolving spirituality. He may be a Bacon, Francis Bacon, or an Aristotle in knowledge, and still not even make his current felt a feather's weight by us, if his power is confined to the manas, or mind. The supreme power resides in the buddhi, latent when wedded to Atman alone, active and irresistible when galvanized by the essence of manas, when none of the dross of the latter commingles with that pure essence to weigh it down by its finite nature. Manas, pure and simple, is of a lower degree, of the earthly. And so your greatest men count but as non-entities in the arena where greatness is measured by the standard of spiritual development. And it is the awakening of Buddha that can let in the light of altruism in the mind, in the soul, and completely regenerate the mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Pedro, for this most beautiful session for us today. You have given us much food for thought and have explained some concepts very beautifully. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
And now the session is open to all our participants. If they would like to ask some questions, have some more insight from Brother Pedro and his wisdom, you're most welcome. In fact, we have plenty of time. By the Indian time, it is 11:27, and we have time till 11:45. So a good 20 minutes more. So if would you like to share some more thoughts? Yes, sir. Brother Pedro, would you like to share some more
Sorry,
thoughts?
you were talking to me.
Yes.
Yes. This is a question that, as I said, one has to consider for oneself. The society and the literature does not impose its understanding on us, but why this very clear emphasis on altruism in one's life if one aims to be a disciple? Why altruism for the masters is a non-negotiable aspect, and the fact that they put some people to test doesn't mean that they determine the outcome of that test. The determining factor is always the individual. But yet this sense of altruism is very important, and perhaps this is something that is worthwhile to consider. Why the emphasis on altruism in the spiritual life?
Yes, indeed. Perhaps our participants' audience would like to share their thoughts on this.
They may be very tired.
Or perhaps contemplating. Yes.
When you said at the end about Buddhi, that
Brother, I have a
that
YouTube question.
Just a
Brother,
moment, please. Sister Diana, let her complete, please.
at the end you said that it may come or it must come via the Buddhic level. So could you explain something more about that?
Yes, that passage is also very well known. And the implication is that if our efforts are limited to the mind alone, first of all, the mind is conditioned by millennia of evolution. Dr. Taimni used to say in one of his books that the reason why people have difficulties with meditation is because the mind for many incarnations always projected everything outside. It developed this capacity, this incapacity to look within. Incidentally, this is the meaning of the word intuition. Tueris in Greek means to look within. And when according to Dr. Tamin and other authors, Madame Blavatsky as well, and the Mahatmas, when the mind, through real study, meditation, selfless service, when the mind is really purified, the light of Buddhi shines within it, right? Now, this light is not created by the world, is not a mundane light. It's a spiritual light. It shines within the mind, and when it shines within the mind, the whole nature of the mind is illuminated by Buddhi. And therefore, there is a completely different understanding that one does not exist for oneself, one does not live for oneself. There is this understanding that there is no difference between myself and the other person. All the difference that existed before fall away. I was very fortunate of being part of the Human Regeneration Seminar in the International Theosophical Center in Naarden in July 1990 with Radhaji. And she was commenting on the three objects of the TS. When she commented on the first object, universal brotherhood without distinction, she said, universal brotherhood is a mind without barriers. That's the result of the light of Buddhi, you know. And this isn't the first object of the TS. And of course, in the spiritual path, there are other stages. That they say that the relationship between manas and Buddhi is one of them. Then there is a relationship between manas, Buddhi, and Atma that generates an understanding even more profound of life. These are just tentative thoughts. They have to be tested by experience. Even
brother, I have a very simple question.
yes.
In the context of the following question, you said that the light shines within, then the whole scenario changes and the human being becomes I'm not sure, but do you mean to say this is same themselves only to the pure heart?
Can you repeat the last sentence?
Yes. The powers and forces of the spirit lend themselves only to the pure in heart. So, is it the same thing, same as enlightened or the light shines in the buddhi. Is it the same? You want to say confirm this?
Yes, in theosophical literature, this it's like a common factor that the light of Buddhi will not shine in an impure mind. An impure mind means a mind dominated by the notion of self. The Buddha said this in one of his, he said this in one of his allocutions to his disciples. He said, there is this householder, he has a property in North India somewhere 25 centuries ago. He's happy, he has a family, he has animals, servants, and so on. One night, this stranger comes in the household, knocks on the door. The householder opens the door. There is the stranger there, dusty, tired, hungry, and so on. The stranger said, I'm traveling. If you can give me accommodation for one night, I'll leave in the morning. The householder looked at the stranger and decided to be nice to him, allow him to sleep in the quarters of the servants, gave him some food. In the morning, the stranger met his family, and the family liked him. So the householder saw that and allowed him to stay for another day, another 3 days, 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, permanently. One night, the stranger walked into the householder room with a knife and killed him and took over the property. So Lord Buddha said to his disciples, the stranger is the self. We negotiate with the self. We undergo horse trading with the self. We don't think that the sense of self is dangerous, but the sense of self destroys relationships, families, communities. The sense of self is eroding the peace in the world today, and therefore the light of Buddha will not shine in that mind dominated by self-centeredness. So that our job is to purify our mind. Again, to quote Radhaji, I apologize for that. She said in a letter, she showed me the draft, she said, the only reason we are in this world is to purify our minds.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother, very much for your clarification.
Thank you.
Pedro, sir, I would like to ask you something, if I may.
Yes?
So I would like to know your thoughts on what is the nature of the self, as we say that there are 3 levels of the self. We have the personal self, then there is that is the personality, then next level is the individuality or the individual self, and even when the individual is gone, even when that is annihilated, there is another level of self, which is the spiritual self. So these are the 3 levels, they rise higher and higher. So how does their nature differ? Please.
Do we have another 3 hours?
I'm afraid not, but 5 minutes, good 5 minutes.
Well, yes, there are these levels. First of all, it's Brother Peter, when he was commenting on talks on the path of occultism, volume 2, on the voice of the silence, he said that there is a stage on the path that the causal body of the individual is destroyed. The causal body is the repository of all experiences of that soul for many, many, many incarnations. Sorry, I have to send a message to the household. There is a cat calling. And Mr. Leadbeater says that the reason why the causal body is destroyed, it is because it is full of past impressions, past experiences, and the individual is moving to something completely new. That means our hardship, which is a consciousness so vast, so full of compassion and wisdom. There is nothing of the past in that consciousness. Of course, but the immediate sense of self is, as Mr. Krishnamurti so eloquently said, the immediate sense of self is a center of memory. Always claiming past experiences, dwelling in the past, comparison. There is nothing live in that self. It is just a center of memory. But it's also a center of personal greatness, imaginary greatness and so on. It's a center of division between me and other people. So whoever meditates seriously will have to see this, this tendency to, there is this center, the human consciousness is so vast, and yet I dwell in this center. So this is one point. The individuality is different because it's not dominated by thought anymore. It is more expanded, but as you mentioned correctly, it's still, there is a sense of self there. And only later on, this separate self dies. The Voice of the Silence calls it the heresy of separateness. Why? Because all life is one, and hence altruism.
Right. Thank you, sir, for sharing that insight with us. It certainly brings, we have to think on it and meditate on it a lot. Yes. Any other questions?
Sir, in one of Mahatma letters, sir, I am Pradeep. In one of Mahatma letters, letter number 74, old letter number 30, there also Mahatma mentioned two paths. That paths are open, there are two paths. One are, you will be tempted, deceived by two paths will open before you, both leading to the goal. Whether those two paths Mahatma mentioned in that letter, the same path in Voice of Silence which you referred, open path and secret path, or it is different? Mahatma mentioned in that open path, there are people like Jesuits who will misguide you, all these things are there. Whether this open path, what Mahatma mentioned in that letter, and in this Voice of Silence, it seems it is different to one another. It is not the same what Mahatma mentioned in the Mahatma letters.
Yes.
In Voice of Silence, it is. Sorry.
Yes.
It is,
yeah. It is, if it is different, it's good because it causes us to think. The American section once, many years ago, published a bookmark saying, think, it may be a new experience for you. And sometimes the language changes, but I think these differences in the literature are very important. For example, in the Mahatma letters, they say God doesn't exist. And I wrote an article many years ago when I acknowledged that, but I also said that there was an adept higher than the masters who mentioned the word God twice in his letter, the Mahachohan letter. So, of course, some people who agree more with the teachings of the Mahatma letters and HPB, they don't like this because they say, no, if they say there is no God, that's absolute. But the truth is, there is nothing absolute in theosophical literature. We have to continue to investigate. As I have said many times, the Theosophical Society is not a belief-based organization, but it is an inquiry-based organization. Each one of us have to continue to inquire. I didn't include this passage from the Mahatma letter. I'll have a look at them, and but whenever we find differences, we have to pause and consider. Sometimes they exist in the literature to test our discernment, you know. And also, it could be an opportunity to develop some sort of intuition if you consider these things for yourself.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
This has been a very wonderful session. Thank you so much, Pedro sir. And I really like that statement which you make, that this is a inquiry-based organization, not a belief-based organization. So whatever we have learned and studied here, we must inquire about it in our own meditation and contemplation. I think now we are almost up with our time, and if there are no more questions, then we can bring today's session to a close. Pradeep sir, anything you want to add?
No, tomorrow at the same time, Madam Linda will speak.
Right. So thank you to all our participants, and thank you, Pedro sir, once again for being here with us and giving us your time. Thank you.
Very illuminated class. Thank you.